A man who thought he knew the truth discovered something much more deeper than he could ever imagine. Have you ever found yourself stuck in the most random situation that for a second you thought was just too ridiculous to be real? You know, one of those moments where everything around you seems to be flipping upside down, and all you can do is laugh at how absurd it all is. Well, that was me. Except I didn't laugh at first. I was more confused than anything. Picture this. One moment, I'm just enjoying a casual stroll through the park, minding my own business, thinking about the usual things, life, the weather, maybe what I'll have for dinner. Nothing too out of the ordinary. Then, out of nowhere, I end up running into a situation so random that if I told you about it, you might question my sanity. And honestly, if I didn't have a few witnesses, I might have done the same. It all started with a simple text. You know, the kind of text you get from a friend that's supposed to be harmless. Something like, "Hey, you free to hang out tonight?" Classic, right? But the thing is, this wasn't just any text. Oh no, this was a text that would send me spiraling into what I can only describe as an alternate universe of coincidences, misunderstandings, and a whole lot of confusion. I knew something was off the second I read it. My friend Mark had invited me to a small get-together at a new place he had found. Now, Mark was one of those guys who was always in the know, always had the best spots, the secret hangouts, you name it. So, naturally, I said yes without thinking twice. But here's where things started to get odd. I walked to the location he mentioned, only to realize it wasn't quite what I expected. And when I arrived, well, that's when the real chaos began. Imagine walking into a place thinking you're just going to hang out with a few friends, only to find yourself in the middle of well, let's just say a very unexpected scenario. There were people everywhere, but not the people I was expecting. The food was, let's just say, not exactly what I had in mind. And the vibe? Well, let's just say it was off, in a way that was almost too strange to be believable. So, why am I telling you this? Because in that moment, I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I knew exactly what was going on. But as it turns out, the truth was much deeper than I could have ever imagined. The city was buzzing, but in that comfortable, laid-back way that only a Saturday afternoon can bring. The kind of vibe where everyone seems to move just a little bit slower, like we were all in on some sort of secret that only the weekend could understand. The streets were lined with cafes spilling out onto sidewalks, their tables dotted with people sipping iced lattes and chatting lazily. Music from street performers floated through the air, blending with the sound of laughter and the occasional honk from a passing car. It was the kind of place where, if you didn't know any better, you'd think time had slowed down just to let everyone catch their breath. I was in the heart of downtown, well, downtown for my small but vibrant city. There was something charming about it, something that felt like it was always on the verge of turning into a big city, but never quite got there, and honestly, I liked it that way. You had everything you needed, restaurants, shops, a little bit of everything, but without the hustle and bustle of a place like New York or LA. The city was a mix of the old and the new, with historical buildings sitting side by side with modern glass towers, like it was still figuring out whether it wanted to be classic or trendy. That day, I was in one of my favorite spots, a little park tucked between two buildings. The kind of park that isn't on a map, but somehow everyone knows about it. It was filled with trees that formed a canopy, offering shade and a cool breeze, making it a hidden gem for those who needed a quick escape from the city's chaos. The paths were lined with bricks, some worn smooth by the years of footsteps, others cracked from the odd tree root making its way through. Birds sang in the trees and squirrels darted across the path, always on some sort of mission. I was just walking through, enjoying the scenery, letting my mind wander, when I bumped into Sarah, one of those people you can't help but like the moment you meet them. I had known Sarah for a few years now, and she had a way of turning every interaction into something fun. She was tall, with messy brown hair that always seemed to be in a state of controlled chaos, like she'd just rolled out of bed, but made it look good. Her laugh was contagious, the kind of laugh that made you feel like you were in on the joke, even if you didn't know what the joke was. She had a heart that was as big as her personality, and that's probably why she made friends with almost everyone she met. Sarah was the type of person who would stop in the middle of the street to pet a dog she'd never seen before, just because she couldn't resist. She didn't just live in the moment, she embraced it, and today was no different. As soon as I saw her, she was grinning ear to ear, holding a coffee cup in one hand, waving at me with the other. "Hey, stranger," she called out, her voice carrying across the park. "Sarah, what's up?" I asked, giving her a smile. I hadn't seen her in a couple of weeks, and it felt like we'd both been running in different directions. But now here she was, looking like she had all the time in the world. "Oh, just living the dream," she replied with a wink. And by living the dream, I mean being completely unproductive and enjoying the sunshine. "What about you?" I shrugged. "Same. Just needed some fresh air." She motioned to the park around us. "This is the place for it, huh?" I nodded, taking in the surroundings again. "Definitely. It's like the whole world slows down when you're here." We both stood there for a moment, enjoying the peace. But, as with most things in life, it didn't last long. In the distance, I could see Mark waving enthusiastically. Mark was another one of those characters you couldn't quite predict. He had a way of showing up at the most random moments, often when you least expected it, and acting like he'd been there all along. Mark had this strange combination of charm and unpredictability. He was the type of guy who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave an hour later with everyone's contact info and a promise to hang out again. He wasn't exactly the life of the party, but you could always count on him to make things interesting. His thick, curly hair was constantly falling into his eyes, and he wore it like it was a fashion statement, though he probably didn't even realize it. His clothes were a mix of casual and bizarre, often featuring a graphic shirt from some obscure band you've never heard of, paired with cargo shorts. Yes, cargo shorts. You'd think he was living in 2004, but somehow he made it work. As he walked over, he was chatting away about something, clearly in a good mood, and Sarah and I exchanged a look. I could tell she was about to interrupt him with one of her classic one-liners, but Mark didn't give her the chance. Instead, he reached us, grinning. "All right, folks," he said, adjusting his sunglasses even though the sun wasn't out. "I've got something insane lined up for tonight. You're gonna want to be there." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Insane how?" He didn't give a direct answer, but that was typical Mark. He was always teasing something big, but by the time the event actually rolled around, it was usually something much more, normal than expected. "We'll see," I said, taking a sip of my water. "Where's this insane thing going down?" Mark just winked. "You'll see. Just trust me. It'll be an experience." I looked at Sarah, who seemed just as intrigued as I was. "What do you think?" She shrugged. "I'm always up for an adventure. Let's do it." And just like that, we were in. Little did I know, this adventure was about to turn into the kind of night I'd never be able to forget. We all gathered at the spot Mark had mentioned, which turned out to be a quirky little pop-up event that he'd heard about through some friend of a friend. It was being held at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place that looked more like a haunted house than a location for a night to remember. The building was old, its windows cracked and covered in grime, but there were lights strung up along the side, casting a soft glow that seemed out of place. Music thumped from inside, and people milled around the entrance, chatting and laughing as if they were all in on a joke we hadn't quite figured out yet. "I gotta admit," Sarah said, squinting at the building, "this is not what I imagined when Mark said insane." I laughed. "Yeah, this is definitely not what I was expecting either, but hey, it could be fun." Mark was already excitedly waving his arms, practically bouncing on his feet. "This is gonna be great. Trust me." He led the way inside with the kind of confidence that only someone with no plan at all could muster. We entered through a creaky door, and the first thing that hit us was the smell. Think dusty old furniture mixed with a faint whiff of incense. The space was filled with a hodgepodge of mismatched furniture, and the whole thing felt like an art installation designed by someone with a very specific taste and no budget. There were fairy lights draped haphazardly across old couches, and people were scattered around, some engaged in deep conversation, others dancing in the middle of the floor to an oddly out-of-place techno beat. I could tell Sarah was trying to get a read on the situation, but she was already laughing under her breath. "What is this place?" Before I could respond, Mark disappeared into the crowd. It wasn't long before we found ourselves standing near a makeshift bar, old folding tables, stacked with mismatched glasses, and bottles of some questionable-looking punch. I grabbed a drink, Sarah followed suit, and we leaned back against a wall, trying to take it all in. "That's when it hit me," Sarah said, pointing to the far corner of the room where a table was covered in a bizarre assortment of items. There were half-melted candles, an old typewriter, and a giant rubber chicken. I stared for a moment, then back at her. "What do you think that's about?" She raised an eyebrow. "Mystery box, maybe? Guess what's inside?" Just then, Mark came bounding back to us, his excitement practically radiating off him. All right, here's the challenge," he said, clapping his hands together. "Whoever can solve the puzzle on the table over there," he gestured to the bizarre setup with the rubber chicken, "gets a very special prize." Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide. "A rubber chicken, that's the prize." Mark laughed, clearly delighted. "Not just any rubber chicken. It's the key to unlocking the next level of this experience. You'll see. But first, the challenge. You each get one try to solve the puzzle, and you can't look at the instructions. Trust me, it's easy. There's just one catch. You can't stop laughing. If you laugh, you lose. Simple, right?" I raised an eyebrow. "And what if we just get stuck?" He grinned. "Then you get stuck. But you will laugh. No exceptions." I could already feel the giggles bubbling up inside me at the absurdity of it all. Sarah shot me a playful look. "This is ridiculous. Are we really doing this?" Mark was practically bouncing now. "Come on, it's gonna be hilarious, you'll see." And just like that, we were all in, about to face the most comically absurd challenge I'd ever taken on. What started as an ordinary night was quickly turning into something far stranger, and yet I couldn't help but be curious. What was the deal with the rubber chicken? And why did I feel like I was about to burst out laughing at the sheer ridiculousness of it all? Our story begins with a cast of characters that could only exist in a world where things go hilariously off track in the best way possible. Each one is quirky, likable, and always ready for the next adventure, even if it means getting tangled in ridiculous situations. The best part? You'd want to hang out with all of them, and you might just find yourself wondering what it would be like to join in on the madness. First up, there's Mark, the catalyst for every wild idea in the group. If spontaneity were a person, it would be Mark. He's the kind of guy who would walk into a room and somehow convince everyone to follow him to the moon. It's his contagious energy and unshakable confidence that draws people in, even if his plans often resemble a jumbled mess of half-thought-out schemes. But that's part of his charm. He's the sort of friend who can convince you to try something ridiculous with a single raised eyebrow and a playful grin. Mark's background is as colorful as his personality. He's worked everything from retail jobs to short stints as a freelance travel blogger, though none of his endeavors have quite panned out the way he'd hoped. But no matter how many projects fall through, Mark always manages to land on his feet. And despite all the failed attempts, He maintains that everything he does is part of a larger, grander adventure that'll pay off eventually. His most recent big idea, a pop-up event that was guaranteed to be the next big thing. Whether it would be or not was still up for debate, but he believed in it with a fervor that was hard to ignore. Then there's Sarah, Mark's childhood friend, who's always caught between skepticism and amusement. With a dry sense of humor and a sharp wit, Sarah provides the perfect counterbalance to Mark's over-the-top enthusiasm. Where Mark charges ahead without thinking, Sarah is the one who carefully analyzes the situation, but often with a smirk. She's been through enough of Mark's schemes to know that they rarely turn out as expected, but she's also learned that sometimes it's worth going along for the ride. Sarah is a self-proclaimed professional overthinker, a trait that often leads to her dissecting every little detail, sometimes to the point of hilarity. Though she spends a lot of time questioning the logic behind Mark's plans, she's also the first one to suggest that they go ahead and give it a try. It's a mix of curiosity and the sheer joy she gets from watching things unfold in the most unpredictable way possible. By day, Sarah works as a freelance graphic designer, spending her hours creating digital art and trying not to overthink every tiny pixel. By night, she's usually along for the next big misadventure with Mark. Next, there's Ellie, the self-appointed planner of the group, though she doesn't always get her way. Ellie is the type of person who lives for lists and schedules, always carrying a notebook in her bag to write down every important detail, no matter how trivial. She's the one who insists that everyone should RSVP for events and that there must be a clear itinerary for a trip, even if it's just a day out at the beach. Despite her obsession with organization, Ellie has a secret love for spontaneity, which is where Mark and Sarah come in. Ellie loves seeing the chaos unfold, even if she's constantly tugging at her hair in the background, trying to maintain some sense of order. With her methodical approach to life, Ellie is the glue that holds the group together when everything falls apart, as it so often does. She's the one scrambling to piece it back together, though she often has to hide her exasperation behind an impromptu laugh. And last but certainly not least is Jesse, the quiet, often reluctant participant in Mark's antics. Jesse is a man of few words, but when he does speak, it's usually something dry and sardonic that cuts through the chaos with surgical precision. He's the kind of guy who will sit on the sidelines, shaking his head, but somehow still find himself pulled into the action. He's Mark's cousin, but unlike Mark, Jesse has no real desire for adventure, at least not the type that involves questionable pop-up events and bizarre challenges. He's more of a let's go to the pub, watch a game, and call it a night kind of guy. But somehow, every time Mark calls him in for one of his shenanigans, Jesse ends up involved. It's never his first choice, but there's something about the group dynamic that always gets him to crack a smile. Jesse works as an accountant in a firm, which means his life is generally predictable, orderly, and uneventful, exactly how he likes it. But deep down, he enjoys the odd burst of unexpectedness that comes with being around people who drag him out of his comfort zone. The way this group interacts is a constant ebb and flow between chaos and calm. Mark's wild ideas are always tempered by Sarah's sarcastic commentary, Ellie's attempts to create some semblance of order, and Jess's quietly bemused presence. It's not unusual to hear Mark and Sarah arguing over some new scheme he's cooked up, with Ellie trying to smooth things over by suggesting they at least check if they have the logistics in place. Meanwhile, Jesse will be sitting back, arms crossed, giving them a look that says, "I'm not even sure I'm part of this, but okay, let's see where this goes." Together, they make an eclectic bunch of friends. Their interactions are easygoing and full of playful banter. It's clear that, no matter how often they bicker or how many of Mark's crazy ideas fail, they've all been through enough together that they wouldn't trade it for anything. Each one of them brings something special to the table, And it's that perfect balance between spontaneous chaos and dry humor that makes their friendship so endearing. In a world where friendships often get bogged down by drama or misunderstandings, these four manage to keep things light, fun, and full of laughter. And when the inevitable mayhem of the night kicks off, you can bet they'll be there, figuring it out together with a smile, or at least an eye roll. Mark had, as usual, gotten a bit carried away with his ideas, and this time he'd come up with the ultimate plan, an impromptu weekend trip to the nearby coastal town for what he promised would be a once-in-a-lifetime beach festival that no one could afford to miss. He was practically vibrating with excitement as he typed out the message to his friends. "Hey, pack your bags. We're going to the beach. You'll thank me later. Trust me, this is going to be epic." Of course, this was all sent at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, when the idea had popped into Mark's head after watching a particularly ridiculous travel vlog about obscure beach events. The problem? There was no festival. When Sarah got the message, she did what she always did. She questioned Mark's judgment. "Are you sure there's a festival?" She texted back, her eyes narrowing as she Googled the name Mark had mentioned. Nothing. Not a single hit. It was like the event didn't exist. But Sarah knew Mark, and when Mark said something would be epic, it usually meant the opposite. Still, she couldn't help but be curious. Maybe he'd actually pulled something off this time. She decided to humor him and replied, "Fine, let's say it's real. What time are we leaving?" Ellie, on the other hand, was already mentally organizing the trip. She'd be the one to look up accommodation, sort out what to pack, and make sure everyone had the necessary snacks. But as soon as she saw the word festival in Mark's text, her skepticism kicked in. "Mark, you're sure about this, right?" she texted, adding a winking emoji to soften the suspicion. It was a slight backhanded compliment to his spontaneity, but it also served as a gentle warning that she wouldn't be packing her things unless she got more solid details. Meanwhile, Jesse, as expected, took his usual approach to Mark's last-minute trips, complete and total indifference. "Not interested in some random beach festival. I'll pass," he texted back, his thumbs tapping away in boredom. But then, as always, there was the follow-up text that sealed his fate. "You're the only one who has a car. We need your help getting there. Let me know when you're packed." With one simple message, Jess's plans for a quiet weekend at home were officially over. He groaned and threw his phone onto the couch, knowing full well that even though he had no interest in the event, he'd somehow find himself there anyway. The next day, as Mark excitedly began the group chat with detailed messages about the drive, Ellie had already done her research. It turns out that Mark's festival wasn't a festival at all, but a small, local gathering of beachgoers at a beach house owned by someone who was, according to the one-page event flyer Ellie found online, offering free drinks and snacks in exchange for social media shout-outs. No music, no games, no fireworks, just a couple of tents, and some questionable free merch. Ellie couldn't help but laugh, sending the flyer to the group with a message, "Epic festival, huh?" Sarah, always the skeptic, saw this as yet another of Mark's failed schemes. But Ellie's logistical mind clicked into gear. "It's a low-key beach hangout. We can just go to the beach and call it a day. At least we get a free drink, right?" Ellie replied, rolling her eyes as she updated her packing list with the new and disappointing details. But as fate would have it, things were about to go even further off the rails. The night before the trip, Mark sent out a final flurry of enthusiastic messages, telling everyone to meet at my place at 8 a.m. sharp. Beach time, baby. He even added a celebratory gif of a dancing penguin. When the group arrived at Mark's apartment, they were greeted with a sight that could only be described as chaotic. There were bags scattered around, an overpacked cooler teetering by the door, and Mark, grinning ear to ear, holding a giant inflatable flamingo. "Isn't this the perfect way to travel in style?" he said with a wink. It wasn't a rhetorical question. Mark truly believed that this was the perfect trip. His enthusiasm was contagious, even if his preparation was less than ideal. Jesse, though, was already having second thoughts. He stared at the flamingo. "Is that necessary?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Absolutely," Mark replied with a firm nod. "How else are we supposed to float in style? You can't go to a beach without one of these." Mark dropped it into the back of Jess's car, which was packed with coolers, backpacks, and far too much sunscreen. As they piled into the car and began their drive, things took a turn for the worse. In the middle of the trip, just as they were passing a sign for the town, Mark proudly declared, "All right, we're almost there. Time for the beach festival of the century." But before anyone could respond, Jess's GPS started malfunctioning, directing them in circles. A quick glance at the map showed they were nowhere near the coastal town. They were, in fact, heading in the opposite direction toward an abandoned theme park that had been closed for years. It turned out that Mark had gotten the address wrong, thinking the beach was on one side of town when it was actually miles away on the other. "You've got to be kidding me," Jesse muttered, half laughing, half groaning as he pulled off the road into a gas station. The rest of the group sighed in exasperation, but couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Mark was quick to recover, though, and announced, "No worries, everyone. We'll just take a detour. It's going to be one of those trips where we get lost and then discover something amazing, I promise." Sarah rolled her eyes, but there was a hint of excitement in her voice when she asked, "Where are we going now?" Mark, with his typical mischievous grin, shrugged. "I don't know yet, but we'll find a hidden gem along the way. Just trust me." What followed was a detour of such absurd proportions that it could only be described as a series of unfortunate but highly amusing events. From a surprisingly delightful roadside taco stand to a spontaneous pit stop at a local petting zoo, where Mark tried to win a plush toy at a claw machine, but ended up accidentally knocking over the entire display, the group was swept up in a journey that had completely derailed from the original plan. Yet, despite the confusion, the entire experience felt oddly fitting, a comical, spontaneous, and unforgettable adventure. Finally, they did reach the beach, though not in the way Mark had imagined. They found themselves on a completely different beach. No festival in sight, just a quiet stretch of sand dotted with families and surfers. The chaos was real, but so was the fun. And somehow, the mix-up felt like the perfect ending to Mark's well-meaning, but hilariously misguided idea. As the group of friends finally arrived at the beach, they realized they were miles away from the festival Mark had promised. Mark, ever the optimist, immediately declared that this was the best unexpected detour ever. But Sarah couldn't help but feel a little skeptical. They'd gotten lost, wandered through odd roadside attractions, and now here they were, at a quiet, calm beach with no festival in sight. The tension in the air was thick with curiosity. What were they even doing here? But true to Mark's nature, he quickly tried to turn the situation into something more magical. "Guys, look at the water. It's perfect. Let's just relax. Who needs a festival when we've got the whole beach to ourselves?" He pointed dramatically at the waves, though the only thing remarkable about them was their serene predictability. Sarah raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, knowing well enough that Mark's perfect beach day could easily end in a hot dog stand disaster, or worse, someone getting stuck in a sandcastle. Ellie, ever the peacemaker, suggested they set up camp anyway. So they dragged the cooler, chairs, and beach towels down to the sand. Everything seemed to be falling into place, until Ellie realized she had forgotten the sunscreen. "No worries," she laughed, pulling out a tube of what looked like sunblock, but was, in fact, some random lotion she'd grabbed from her car. It turned out to be an old bottle of aloe vera gel. "Well, that's going to be great," she said sarcastically as she squeezed it onto her hands, knowing that the sticky mess wasn't going to help anyone. But the real mystery came moments later when Jesse, lounging on the sand, suddenly stood up with wide eyes. "Wait, do you guys hear that?" he asked. The group paused, ears straining for any sounds. For a moment, the beach seemed utterly peaceful. Then they heard it, a strange rhythmic thudding noise coming from the trees behind them. It was almost like someone drumming, or maybe a group of people running. Mark, ever the brave adventurer, stood up and began walking toward the noise. "This is it. This is what we've been waiting for. Some kind of secret beach party. I knew it." Everyone followed him, though with less enthusiasm. They trudged through the sand toward the source of the sound, only to find a group of children having an impromptu game of beach volleyball, hitting a ball so wildly that it ricocheted off the trees like a boomerang. The thudding noise, the ball smacking the trunks over and over. "Well, that's one way to get the party started," Sarah muttered, almost relieved it wasn't some wild rager. But Ellie, always the optimist, quickly turned it into a fun opportunity. "Hey, maybe we can join in and make some new friends." The kids were game, of course, and they invited the group to play, though not without a series of failed passes and missed hits. The entire experience was a disaster, with the group of adults trying their best to keep up, but each ball miss hit only increased the sense of anticipation. Would they ever make it through the day without one more hilarious detour? At least the day wasn't dull, and even though they hadn't found the festival, something told them this was shaping up to be an unexpectedly memorable adventure. As the group gathered around the cooler, Mark beamed. "See, told you the beach was the perfect place. Now, who's ready for some mystery snacks?" He pulled out a pack of mystery-flavored chips and handed them out to everyone, even though no one knew what they were actually eating. Was it BBK? Was it nacho cheese? You'll never know, he said with a wink. But just as Sarah bit into a chip and was about to comment on the taste, Mark's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, eyes widening as he stared at the screen. "Guys, you're not going to believe this." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "What is it now? Did the festival suddenly appear on Google Maps?" "No," Mark said, his grin stretching from ear to ear. "But there's something even better. Just wait till you see what I've planned next." The group exchanged confused looks. "What now?" Jesse asked, half excited, half suspicious. Mark, looking mischievously toward the horizon, turned his phone around. "You won't believe where we're going next." And with that, the mystery only deepened. Would they finally make it to their destination? Or was this just the beginning of another wild ride? As the afternoon wore on, the group of friends began to realize that the festival Mark had promised was a bit of a wild goose chase. With the setting sun casting a warm golden glow over the horizon, Sarah, Ellie, Jesse, and Mark sat on the beach, their once enthusiastic plans now dwindling into amused confusion. Mark had led them on an adventure that had taken them on roads they didn't know existed, through beach towns with only half-open taco stands and around beach volleyball games that no one had planned for. It was beginning to feel like they were chasing an idea rather than a destination. Just as Sarah was about to suggest heading home, partly because she was getting sunburned and partly because her patience was running thin, something caught her eye. Over by the picnic area, a group of people were setting up what looked like a DJ booth, complete with colourful lights and a giant sign that read "Surprise Beach Festival." Sarah squinted, unsure whether this was another one of Mark's wild fantasies. Could it be? Could it be the festival Mark had promised them? "No way," she muttered under her breath, rubbing her eyes. "That's really happening." Mark, who had been lounging lazily in a chair, suddenly shot up like a rocket, his face lighting up with excitement. "I knew it." He sprinted toward the festival setup, leaving the group in stunned silence. Ellie, ever the good sport, raised her hand in surrender. "All right, Mark, you win." "You were right." As they gathered their belongings and followed Mark to the mysterious festival, They couldn't help but chuckle at the unexpected turn of events. It was almost as if the universe had finally thrown them a bone after all the detours. When they reached the main area of the festival, it was clear that this wasn't the huge, extravagant event Mart had envisioned. It was a surprisingly modest affair, a small, community-driven beach bash with a quirky sense of charm. There were food trucks offering fusion tacos, a makeshift dance floor under a string of twinkling lights, and a group of people huddled around a bonfire, roasting marshmallows. Not exactly Coachella, Sarah joked, still in disbelief that this was the festival they'd been chasing all day. But there was something undeniably pleasant about the vibe. People were dancing with abandon, enjoying simple pleasures like food, music, and laughter. In the distance, a beach volleyball game was in full swing, with a team of teenagers laughing as they tried to keep the ball from hitting the sand. "All right, I admit it," Jesse said, his arms raised in mock surrender. "This is actually pretty great." The festival was small, yes, but it felt like the perfect culmination of the day's misadventures. There was no grand mystery to unravel or deep, dark secret to uncover, just the joy of the moment, shared with strangers who were all united by the simple pleasure of the beach. Then, as they wandered further into the festival, Mark noticed something even more surprising, a familiar face. "Wait, no way. Is that really who I think it is?" He pointed toward a group of people sitting near the bonfire, and sure enough, there was Sarah's childhood friend, Chloe, who she hadn't seen in years. Chloe was waving, a big smile on her face, and as she spotted Sarah, she stood up and ran over, her arms wide open. "Oh my gosh, Sarah, is that really you?" For a moment, Sarah stood frozen, unsure how to react. Chloe, the girl who had once been her best friend in high school, before life got in the way, was standing right in front of her, as if the universe had pulled a funny little trick to reunite them. The awkwardness of the situation quickly melted away as they hugged, both laughing as if no time had passed. Mark grinned and leaned over to Jesse. "See, I told you. This was all part of my plan." Jesse raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, because running into an old friend was part of the plan." "Sure, Mark. But it didn't take long for everyone to realize that this was no accident." Chloe explained that she had been helping organize the festival for months. It wasn't the grand beach bash that Mark had imagined, but it was exactly what they needed. An escape from the daily grind, a chance to reconnect, and a place where they could simply let loose. As the group sat together around the fire, chatting and enjoying the music, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the day's events. It had been a day full of surprises, detours, and misunderstandings, but in the end, it had brought her to this moment, reconnecting with an old friend in the most unexpected of places. "You know," Sarah said, looking at Mark, "you might just be a genius after all." Mark, who had been quietly sneaking chips from the snack table, looked up and beamed. "Told you. Sometimes the best things in life come from the wildest adventures." And at that moment, the mystery of the festival was solved, not through some grand discovery or unexpected plot twist, but simply by enjoying the quirky, spontaneous beauty of the journey itself. It wasn't about finding the perfect event or having everything go according to plan. It was about being open to the surprises along the way and realizing that the best experiences were the ones you least expected. What Sarah didn't know at the time was that this wasn't just about finding an event. It was about reconnecting with people and rediscovering the joy of life's little moments. The person she thought she was avoiding, the idea of finding perfection, was actually the very thing that led her to the perfect day. As the night wore on, the festival's atmosphere grew even more magical. The bonfire crackled softly, sending sparks into the sky, while laughter filled the air, blending harmoniously with the mellow beats of the DJ. Sarah, Ellie, Jesse, and Mark found themselves sitting together on a cozy blanket, the four of them casually chatting as if they had never been apart. It was one of those rare moments when everything felt just right. No one was in a hurry. No one was worried about the next thing they had to do. They were simply present in the moment, enjoying the company of good friends, an unexpected adventure, and the warmth of the fire that flickered before them. For Sarah, this moment was particularly special. It had been a long time since she'd felt so carefree. Life had a tendency to pull her in different directions, with her work and her responsibilities often clouding the simpler joys of life. But sitting there, listening to Ellie's jokes, watching Jessie attempt and fail to dance to the bait, and seeing Mark's usual mischief turn into unfiltered happiness, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed these moments until now. Do you remember that time, back in high school, when we all tried to build that treehouse? Ellie asked, laughing as she took a sip of her drink. Sarah chuckled at the memory. We thought we were professionals, right? And then we ended up getting stuck halfway up the tree. Mark, who had been silently observing, suddenly broke in with a grin. And then I tried to jump off the roof of my house because I thought it would be cool, and I ended up with that cast on my leg for 6 weeks. Jessie rolled his eyes playfully. You were never cool, Mark. The group burst into laughter, and for a few moments, nothing else mattered. It was as though time had stopped, allowing them to savor the joy of simply being together. For Sarah, this evening wasn't just about the festival or the adventure. It was a reminder of what truly mattered, the people she chose to surround herself with. It didn't matter that the day had started off a bit chaotic, or that the festival had turned out to be smaller than they expected. What mattered was the connection between them, the way they effortlessly fell back into old rhythms, as though no time had passed at all. It was a beautiful realization, one that made her smile softly to herself. Ellie, sensing the shift in Sarah's mood, nudged her gently. Hey, Sarah, I know we've been all over the place today, but you've got a way of making everything feel better. Sarah blinked, taken aback by the sincerity in Ellie's voice. What do you mean? Ellie laughed lightly, though there was something deeper behind her words. You've always been the glue, Sarah. You keep us grounded. I'm glad we're all together again, especially like this. Jessie, who had been quiet for a while, added, I'm with Ellie. I think we all needed this more than we realized. For a moment, Sarah's heart swelled. It wasn't often she let herself be vulnerable, but hearing her friend's words made her realize just how important their bond was. They weren't just people she hung out with. They were her anchors, her constant through the changing tides of life. Mark, never one to miss a chance for a dramatic gesture, raised his glass. Here's to us. To the adventures we never plan, and the people who make them unforgettable. The group raised their glasses in unison, the clink of their cups echoing into the night. The warmth of the fire and the shared joy between them made it clear. These moments, however simple, were the ones that would stay with them forever. As they sat back, letting the night unfold around them, Sarah realized that this evening had gifted her something priceless. She hadn't just reconnected with her friends. She'd rediscovered herself, the person who loved adventure, the one who found joy in the small moments, and the one who knew that sometimes the best parts of life weren't the grand gestures, but the quiet laughter shared with good friends under the stars. This was the emotional high, the victory of being present in the moment, of not worrying about what was to come, but cherishing what was happening right here, right now. And in that moment, Sarah understood that this was the true magic of life. The people you hold dear and the joy you find in unexpected places. It was the kind of happiness that didn't need to be chased. It was already here, within reach.
As the night wore on and the festival began to wind down, the group of friends found themselves standing in a circle near the bonfire, the warm glow casting long shadows on the grass. Laughter had faded into the background, replaced by a more reflective mood. They were all still basking in the euphoria of the evening. But now, there was an underlying question hanging in the air. What next? The conversation had shifted away from the past and the good old days to something more present. Ellie, always the one to stir things up with her impulsive ideas, suddenly threw out an idea that took everyone by surprise. "All right, everyone. We've spent way too much time overthinking things. Who's up for going to that midnight diner down the road? You know, the one that's only open once a month. The one with the crazy pancakes." Mark, who had been busy attempting, and failing, to capture a decent group selfie with his phone, glanced up, half smiling. "Wait, that diner. The one with the giant waffles that could probably feed a small army." Jess, always the practical one, raised an eyebrow. "You really want to go there? It's nearly midnight, and we've had a long day. I mean, what if the pancakes are just a myth?" There was a moment of silence as the group exchanged glances. Each of them weighed the decision in their own way. Sarah was exhausted, but the idea of another adventure with her friends was hard to resist. Ellie, on the other hand, was practically bouncing with excitement. To her, the diner was a symbol of spontaneous joy, of embracing the moment and the absurdity of life. She couldn't resist. Finally, Sarah, feeling the warmth of the evening settle comfortably around her, broke the silence with a smile. "You know what? Why not? Let's do it. I'm in for pancakes the size of my face." The decision was made, and with a mixture of amusement and a touch of mischief, the group gathered their things and began walking toward the exit of the festival grounds. But before they reached the parking lot, Mark stopped dead in his tracks, causing the others to look back at him with curiosity. "You know what?" Mark said, his voice suddenly serious, though the smile playing on his lips betrayed him. "I think I should drive." Jess, who had been the de facto driver of the group for years, raised his eyebrows, both surprised and amused. "Oh, really? You? The guy who thought it was a great idea to drive us into a ditch last summer?" Mark shrugged, unbothered. "Hey, you can't win 'em all. But I've had a few lessons. Plus, I'm feeling lucky tonight." Sarah and Ellie exchanged a look, and despite the moment of tension, both burst into laughter. It was clear that even in his unpredictable ways, Mark was still the person who could make any decision feel lighthearted, even if it involved a bit of risk. With a shrug and a laugh, the group agreed, and Mark enthusiastically led the way to his car. No one argued. In the grand scheme of things, whether or not Mark managed to drive them safely to the diner didn't matter. What mattered was that they were together, making decisions not based on fear or practicality, but on the simple desire to make the most of the night. As they piled into Mark's car and headed off toward the diner, it wasn't just about the pancakes or the waffles. It was the shared decision to let go of the mundane and embrace the ridiculous, the carefree joy of being together. The consequences, if any, were light. The decisions were made in fun, and the night unfolded with an easy camaraderie. Even if they never made it to that legendary midnight diner, the adventure was more than enough. Next stop, pancakes. Sarah cheered, the excitement returning to her voice. And with that, the group of friends drove off into the night, each of them a little lighter, a little freer, and certainly a little more willing to embrace the unexpected joys that came with being in each other's company. The drive to the diner turned out to be just as amusing as the festival itself. Mark, despite his somewhat questionable driving skills, managed to navigate the winding roads with only a few nervous glances from Sarah and Ellie. They sang along to the radio, each of them contributing their own unique take on the lyrics, creating a harmony of mismatched voices that only deepened the sense of camaraderie. By the time they arrived at the diner, it was just as quirky and charming as they remembered. Neon lights blinked above the entrance, casting a soft glow on the pavement, while a bell jingled merrily as they entered. The diner was empty except for a few regulars sitting at the counter, and the smell of pancakes, bacon, and syrup filled the air. Their goal, simply to enjoy a late-night treat together, had been met. But along the way, the misunderstanding that had loomed over them, like a fog from the start, had been completely dissolved. It turned out that the reason Ellie had pushed so hard for the trip wasn't just for the pancakes, but because she wanted to surprise everyone. Earlier in the day, she had quietly arranged for a free round of desserts from the diner's owner, who just so happened to be an old family friend. What Ellie hadn't anticipated was that her friends had assumed her motivation was solely about indulging in sweet treats, when in reality, she had been planning this surprise for days. As they sat down at the retro booths, with plates piled high with pancakes, waffles, and an assortment of other indulgent treats, Ellie looked at each of them and grinned. "Okay, I admit it. There's a reason I insisted we come here tonight." She held up her hand like a confessional. "I wanted to treat you guys to dessert, courtesy of the diner's owner. It's my thank you for being such awesome friends." The revelation hit like a gentle breeze, pleasant, easy, and unburdened by any tension. The group burst out laughing, with Jesse shaking his head in disbelief. "You mean, we've been stressing out over pancakes all night because you already had this planned? Ellie, you're impossible." Ellie just laughed, shrugging sheepishly. "I'm just full of surprises." It was a small, sweet moment that wrapped up everything perfectly. The misunderstanding was cleared, and the friends were finally able to focus on what they had come for, each other's company and a bit of fun. The conflict, if it could even be called that, had been resolved in the most natural way possible. There was no deep, lingering tension, no complicated resolutions. It was just a group of friends, coming together and celebrating the simple joy of being together. As they dug into their desserts, their previous worries faded into nothing. The playful tension of the night evaporated as they shared stories, jokes, and laughter over the towering pancakes. Mark, who had initially been dubious about the entire concept of dessert for dinner, found himself raving about the waffles as he devoured them. The diner, with its outdated decor and nostalgic charm, provided the perfect setting for this chapter of their story. Here, in this simple place, everyone had what they needed: companionship, laughter, and a sense of belonging. The night that had started with a vague sense of miscommunication and minor inconveniences had transformed into something far more meaningful. When the bill came, Mark, still high on the joy of having been in the driver's seat for the first time in years, insisted on paying for everyone. This moment was far less about the money than it was about a sense of completion. The evening had gone from confusion and minor chaos to a warm, satisfying conclusion. No one felt out of place. No one felt left out. They were simply friends, happy and united. Okay, we get it. You're the hero for the night," Sarah teased as she slid her share of the bill over to him. But Mark waved her off with a grin. "Just let me have my moment of glory, all right. Besides, I'm the one who got us here in one piece." It was a small act, but it felt like the perfect punctuation to their night. They'd faced a little confusion, had a laugh over an unexpected plan, and emerged with a new appreciation for the simplicity of a good meal and great company. The conflict that had started as a miscommunication about the purpose of the trip, then snowballed into a light-hearted series of events, had now been fully resolved. No one was upset or bothered. It was a night they would all remember fondly, not because it had been an extraordinary adventure, but because it was a perfect reflection of their friendship. They had set out to solve a problem that, in the end, wasn't even there, and the resolution brought them closer together, with each of them feeling a renewed sense of gratitude for the other. "Let's make this a tradition," Ellie suggested as they finished their meal and made their way out of the diner. "Agreed," Jesse said, laughing. "Next time, I'll drive. I mean, I'm the one who hasn't crashed yet." With that, they piled back into Mark's car, their spirits high and their hearts light. The conflict had been resolved, and as the diner disappeared into the night behind them, they each knew that this night, in its own quirky way, had strengthened their bond even more. As the group of friends made their way back to their homes, the journey felt different, lighter, more connected. The night that had begun with a cloud of confusion and miscommunication had somehow transformed into a celebration of their friendship. The resolution to their mini-crisis wasn't just about clearing up a simple misunderstanding. It was about the way they each learned something new about themselves and each other, reinforcing the value of their bond. Mark, for one, had stepped into the role of the driver with a mix of excitement and apprehension, his nerves slowly dissipating as the night progressed. Driving wasn't something he had done much of lately. His recent self-doubt had made him hesitant to take the wheel. But tonight, it wasn't just about getting to the diner. It was about reclaiming his confidence, and he realized that sometimes you have to take the plunge, even if it means making a few mistakes along the way. As he pulled up to his driveway, Mark smiled to himself. He had managed not only to guide the car, but to guide the night toward a happy ending as well. And though it was small, this moment of personal growth felt important. Mark knew he was capable of more than he often gave himself credit for. Sarah, too, had her own realization. Throughout the evening, she had been the voice of reason, trying to keep things on track and making sure everyone was having fun. At the beginning of the night, she had been a little skeptical about Ellie's plans, worried it would be a waste of time or lead to frustration. But the night had unfolded in such an unexpected way that Sarah couldn't help but laugh at herself. She realized she didn't always need to have everything planned out perfectly. Sometimes, letting go of control and simply enjoying the moment was what made it memorable. As she said goodbye to her friends, Sarah had a new sense of peace, knowing that it was okay to be spontaneous every once in a while. Ellie, who had been the orchestrator of the evening's surprise, was, as always, the catalyst for change. She'd spent much of the night worrying that her well-meaning plan would fall apart, that her friends would be upset when they discovered the truth. But by the end of the night, Ellie had learned an important lesson in communication. Sometimes, surprises are best kept simple and honest, and there's no need for overcomplication. She also realized that her friends appreciated her quirky, thoughtful nature, even when her plans didn't always go as expected. As Ellie lay in bed later that night, she thought back to the laughter-filled evening and felt a deep warmth in her chest. Her friendships were strong, and that was enough. Jess, who had spent much of the night teasing and playfully ribbing Mark, came to understand the value of enjoying the chaos. He'd always been the first to dive into the joke, the first to push for fun. But he saw tonight that sometimes the unexpected moments could be the most meaningful. Jess's approach to life was often about quick jokes and avoiding serious moments, but tonight he saw that there was beauty in the genuine connection he shared with his friends. His takeaway from the night was simple but important. Sometimes you don't have to say much to show that you care. As they each went their separate ways, they carried the satisfaction of a night well spent. No major drama, no long-lasting misunderstandings. Just a group of friends who had fun, learned a bit about themselves, and walked away feeling more connected than before. And that was enough to leave each of them in a positive place, with a renewed appreciation for the simplicity and joy of being together. As the night wound down, and the characters drifted into their respective homes, the simplicity of it all began to sink in. The series of minor setbacks, the confusion, and the misunderstandings weren't just funny mishaps. They were reminders of something deeper, something life often tries to teach in a way we don't always recognize at first. Life, it seemed, had a funny way of working itself out, even when plans went completely sideways. The evening had started with a rather elaborate plan to surprise everyone, only to be met with confusion, unexpected detours, and more than a few raised eyebrows. But in the end, all those little moments, those awkward pauses, the minor mishaps, the confusion over timing, had created an experience that was far more memorable than any perfectly executed event ever could have been. Ellie sat back, thinking about how it all had unfolded. She had worried about every detail, expecting things to fall apart, but it was the unpredictability of the night that made it special. It wasn't the perfect surprise, or the precise timing, that had brought them closer. It was the moments of laughter and camaraderie that emerged from the chaos. It was a reminder that life doesn't always need to go according to plan to be meaningful. The moral, it seemed, was clear. Sometimes, the best experiences are those that aren't meticulously planned or controlled. Sometimes, the detours and the unexpected moments lead us to exactly what we need. It was a simple, yet profound realization that brought a sense of peace to Ellie's heart. Life, she thought, was a lot like that evening, perfectly imperfect, and all the more beautiful for it. And just as Ellie settled into this new understanding, a final twist unfolded in the most unexpected of places. The next day, as the group of friends gathered for a casual lunch at their favorite cafe, Sarah casually mentioned, "Oh, by the way, I almost forgot to tell you all. I got a message last night. Turns out that mysterious package I've been waiting for. It's arrived." She paused for dramatic effect. "It's the exact dinner set I had been eyeing for months. The one I thought was sold out." The group looked at each other, confused for a moment, before realizing what had happened. The dinner set Sarah had been hoping for, one that had become a joke during their trip, had been the big surprise Ellie had planned all along. It wasn't just about the diner detour. The real surprise was the dinner set that no one had expected. They all burst out laughing, realizing that while they had been busy sorting out the chaotic elements of the evening, Ellie had actually executed the perfect surprise without anyone even knowing it. What began as a comical misunderstanding, Sarah being upset about not getting the dinner set, had actually turned out to be the perfect way to end the evening. The irony wasn't lost on them. Sometimes, the best surprises are the ones that don't look like surprises at all. The twist wasn't just about the dinner set, though. It was about how life had a funny way of working things out in the end, often better than we could have imagined. Ellie had planned something, sure, but it wasn't the plan that mattered. It was the way they embraced the chaos and found joy in each moment. And in the end, they realized the most important thing wasn't the surprise. It was the journey, the laughter, and the simple fact that they were all together. With that, the group toasted to the unpredictability of life and the joy that can be found in the unexpected. As the evening came to a close, the group of friends found themselves gathered in their usual spot, the same cafe where their journey had begun, but now with a new sense of camaraderie. The chaos of the past few days had been so much more than just a series of confusing events. It had been a beautiful reminder of what really matters, the people you're with, and the joy that comes from simply being together. Ellie, still laughing at how everything had turned out, looked around at her friends. They were chatting happily, each of them basking in the warmth of shared experiences, the kind that didn't come from perfect plans or flawless execution, but from a willingness to embrace the unexpected. They had faced a series of comical setbacks and misunderstandings, but in the end, those moments had only made the laughter more genuine and the connection stronger. The dinner set, the missing keys, the surprise mix-up, all of it had come together in a way that no one could have predicted. And yet, there was a certain beauty in how those unpredictable moments had been exactly what they needed. Ellie had realized that sometimes the best parts of life aren't the ones we plan for. They're the ones that sneak up on us, the surprises that show up when we least expect them, like an old friend knocking on the door at just the right time. As the last sip of coffee was taken and the final jokes were shared, Ellie couldn't help but smile. She knew that this wasn't the end of their journey, just another chapter in the ongoing adventure of their lives. There would be more surprises, more misunderstandings, and more moments of pure joy. Maybe next time, they'd end up in a different city, or perhaps an even bigger mix-up would occur, but whatever it was, they'd face it together. In that moment, Ellie felt a sense of peace, knowing that the real adventure wasn't in the destination, but in the people who were along for the ride. They had learned something valuable, perhaps not through the plans they'd made or the things they'd expected, but through the joy of simply being present with one another. And that, in the end, was more than enough. As the group left the cafe and wandered into the warm evening, laughing about their latest misadventure, the future didn't seem so uncertain. It was full of promise, laughter, and a healthy dose of chaos, and that was just how they liked it. Wherever their next adventure took them, They knew one thing for sure: life would continue to surprise them in the best ways possible. With that, the story came to a close, leaving behind not a sense of finality, but a warm, happy feeling, a reminder that life, with all its imperfections and unpredictable moments, was always better when shared with good friends.